Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Michael never imagined that the day would come when he'd be forced to let go of the most precious part of his life, his daughter, little Daisy, just to ensure her safety and that of her mother, Sasha. It wasn't a decision made lightly, nor was it something he could prepare for emotionally. The pain he felt in that final moment, as he watched them disappear through the security gate, couldn't be softened by any promise of a brighter future or a whispered reassurance that things would somehow be okay. It was the kind of pain that lodged itself in the heart like a blade, a sense of helplessness born from the knowledge that he, the man who was supposed to protect his child, was now the one sending her away. He knew the threats circling Port Charles were far from over, and though letting them go felt like surrender, it was the only way to shield them from the growing chaos rooted deep within the town's fractured soul. Port Charles had become a trap, an invisible web of danger that ensnared anyone who dared to escape the pull of the past. Jason, understanding the urgency and the emotional weight of the situation, helped Sasha quietly disappear with Daisy, guiding them to a secluded countryside safe house under the protection of Robert Scorpio. To Sasha, the move felt like a rebirth. She believed, naively perhaps, that the nightmares were behind her, that the shadows left in the wake of grief and betrayal would finally dissolve in the sunlight of their new beginning. She embraced the quiet, the birdsong at dawn, and the gentle rhythm of life far removed from the conspiracies, courtrooms, and hospital wards of Port Charles. But what she didn't know was that the storm hadn't passed, it was merely gathering strength, circling silently around her. Willow, once a friend, once the nurturing maternal presence in Daisy's life, had fractured. The loss of custody over Daisy had shattered her, not just emotionally, but psychologically. What began as passive-aggressive text messages and cryptic voicemails escalated over weeks into a full-blown mental unraveling. Willow became obsessed with restoring justice, twisting her perception of victimhood until she fully believed she had been wronged by everyone, Michael, Sasha, the court system, and even Daisy herself for forgetting who her real mother was. And from that seed of delusion sprouted something far more dangerous, a plan. Calculated, cold, and executed in silence. Meanwhile, back in Port Charles, other storms were brewing. At General Hospital, Britt Westbourne had slipped quietly onto a flight to Croatia, vanishing without fanfare. But at the Paris airport, Jason, on his way to follow up on a lead, caught sight of a woman who looked alarmingly like Britt. That one moment of recognition stopped him cold and planted a seed of suspicion. Something wasn't right. And if Britt had somehow staged her disappearance, then perhaps everything else. Every event in recent weeks was part of a larger web he hadn't yet untangled. In another corner of the city, Jocelyn Jacks found herself ensnared in a covert operation involving the WSB. Caught in the act under surveillance, she was spotted working with Vaughn, a man whose loyalties remained as murky as his charm was effortless. Anna Devane, sharp-eyed and suspicious, confronted Carly Spencer about her daughter's growing proximity to Vaughn. Carly, defensive yet unsure, admitted that something had shifted in Jocelyn since her sudden trip to Easter Island. There was a maturity in her daughter now, yes, but also a distance, an echo of Dex's death that hadn't fully healed. Anna pushed deeper, connecting dots that Carly didn't want to see. Jocelyn wasn't just in love, she was embedded. And if Vaughn was more than he appeared to be, Jocelyn might already be in far too deep. At the airport, Vaughn executed a small but critical diversion. He charmed Greta, a postal courier carrying encrypted documents, while Jocelyn planted a tracking device in her bag. As Greta boarded a flight to Paris, Jocelyn and Vaughn watched the signal pulse across the screen, their eyes glued to the shifting coordinates. Dante Falconeri observed from the security hub, reporting back to Anna, who by now had pieced together the truth: Jocelyn wasn't acting alone. She was Vaughn's partner in a mission that had yet to fully reveal itself. But while secrets stirred in Port Charles, true terror brewed in the countryside. Robert had temporarily stepped away from his official duties to watch over Sasha and Daisy. His role, once grounded in international espionage, had narrowed into a far more personal mission: protect the only innocent part left of a collapsing legacy. Sasha, wrapped in the lull of rural life, believed they were finally safe. But Willow had found them. She came without sound. A shadow slipping through the edge of the trees. Her figure drifted across the horizon like a phantom, her face pale, twisted into a grotesque smile. She believed she was right. That Daisy belonged to her. That the courts, Michael, and Sasha had all conspired to rip her baby away. And now, she had come to fix it. Inside the quiet home, Sasha rocked Daisy in a worn wooden chair by the window. The light filtered through sheer curtains, soft and golden, casting warmth onto the nursery. The house was old, but Robert had secured it well, or so they thought. Sasha didn't hear the door creak. She didn't sense the presence creeping up the hallway. It wasn't until the floor groaned beneath unfamiliar weight that she turned, clutching Daisy tighter to her chest. Willow didn't speak. Her eyes locked onto the child with an eerie stillness, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. She took a step forward. Then another. Sasha froze in place, unable to breathe, unable to scream. And then Robert appeared. He stepped between them without hesitation, his voice calm but firm. He told Willow to leave. That this wasn't the way. But Willow no longer heard reason. She pulled something from her coat, metal, heavy, and swung. The blow landed hard against Robert's temple. He collapsed. Sasha screamed. She bolted for the back door, Daisy screaming now too, the panic catching in both of their throats like smoke. She ran to the storage shed, a place once meant for wine and firewood, now a last resort shelter. She locked the door behind her and pressed her body against it, whispering Daisy's name like a prayer. Outside, Willow shrieked. She clawed at the walls, cursed Sasha, and begged Daisy to come home. Her voice, twisted with obsession and grief, echoed like thunder. Back in Port Charles, Liesl Albrecht voiced her growing concerns. She had noticed the subtle but chilling changes in Willow. Changes Nina Reeves had brushed off as grief. But now, Liesl was sure. Something was dangerously wrong. She confronted Nina, pointing out the odd glimmer of satisfaction that had flickered across Willow's face when she heard that Sasha and Daisy had left town. Nina, shaken, realized too late that Drew's influence on Willow might not be guiding her toward healing, but something far darker. As night fell in the countryside, police sirens finally cut through the silence. Willow was found outside the storage shed, her nails bloodied from trying to break in. She screamed that her baby was inside, that Sasha had stolen her child. She was subdued, arrested, and eventually transferred to a psychiatric facility under 24-hour supervision. But for Sasha, the damage had been done. Robert survived, but would carry the scar. Sasha, knowing that Willow had found them once, feared she could do so again. She made the decision to relocate, change names, and disappear entirely. Michael, upon hearing the truth, crumbled. The woman he once loved had nearly taken everything from him. The guilt was suffocating. He had let this happen. He had watched Willow unravel and done nothing. Drew's silence, meanwhile, became deafening. Some believed he had known. That he had encouraged Willow's delusions to gain legal advantage. That he had enabled the chaos. He never confirmed or denied anything. Port Charles was left reeling. General Hospital, once a sanctuary for healing, had now become a stage for obsession and madness. Jason returned, vowing to never let Sasha or Daisy be harmed again. Carly grieved not just for the past, but for the future she once believed her family could still have. And as the town settled into uneasy silence, one truth became chillingly clear: what began as a custody battle had become a psychological war, and the scars it left behind would never fade. Sasha and Daisy may have escaped, but the echo of Willow's madness would follow them, like a ghost chasing the sound of a stolen lullaby. Robert Scorpio awoke in the dim, sterile quiet of the hospital, the antiseptic scent thick in the air and the sharp sting of fluorescent light stinging the corners of his tired eyes. The throbbing pain in his skull pulsed with each beat of his heart, a cruel reminder of the blow he had taken. An act of violence delivered not by an enemy of the state or a criminal on the run, but by someone who had once been considered family. The sutures across his scalp itched beneath the gauze, but it was the weight behind his eyes that truly ached, the internal torment of a man who had seen too much, trusted too freely, and failed to prevent the chaos that now threatened to consume the lives of the innocent. The image of Willow's twisted expression haunted him. The vacant, glassy-eyed stare as she lifted the blunt object and brought it down on him without hesitation. It hadn't been rage. It hadn't even been desperation. It was something else, something cold and terrifying. In her mind, she was right. In her mind, she was justified. That certainty in her madness chilled him more than the impact of the strike itself. And now, even as the pain in his head dulled under medication, the question lingered. If she could find them once, what was stopping her from doing it again? Sasha knew the answer before anyone said it out loud. Nothing. There were still too many loose ends. Too many people who believed in Willow. Too many back channels and unofficial favors being passed behind closed doors. So she made the decision quickly and without ceremony. She and Daisy would disappear again. This time under new names, new passports, a new life carved out in a place where even shadows might forget to follow. It was no longer just about survival. It was about ensuring her daughter never again saw the terror of Willow's face inches from her crib. It was about guaranteeing that no one would ever again whisper that maybe Willow deserved a second chance. Under heavy escort, Sasha was relocated to an undisclosed location with the help of a handful of trusted allies, including a covert connection of Jason's, men and women trained to vanish and never be found. They erased everything. Digital footprints. Paper trails. Medical records. Even Daisy's name was changed, handwritten into a forged birth certificate filed in another state. It was a life built on silence and vigilance, and it was the only life Sasha was willing to accept now. Back in Port Charles, the fallout spread like a virus. Liesel Albrecht was incandescent with fury. She stormed into a closed-door meeting with the hospital board, slamming down a stack of psychiatric literature, case files, and charts. She demanded an independent investigation into Willow's state of mind, asserting that too many red flags had been ignored. The hospital had failed Sasha. It had failed Daisy. And worst of all, it had failed to recognize that someone under their roof was spiraling toward irreversible collapse. But Liesel didn't stop there. She named names. Drew Kane, she argued, had not only stood by and allowed this to happen but had actively encouraged it. She described his silence as willful, his restraint as strategic, and his proximity to Willow as toxic. He was not just a witness to her decline, she declared. He was the architect of her delusion. Her words hit like daggers across the table, and no one could look her in the eye. Because even those who had doubted her before were now beginning to wonder, how much had Drew really known? Had he manipulated the narrative for legal advantage? Had he weaponized Willow's trauma to stage an eventual return of custody? Liesel demanded disciplinary action. She wanted Drew suspended from the hospital board, from his non-profit organizations, from every advisory role he'd ever used to launder his image as the noble public servant. She wanted his hands stripped clean of power and his legacy stained with the truth. Carly, who had once placed unwavering trust in Willow, who had defended her to Michael, to Nina, to everyone, found herself reeling with disbelief. Her instincts had failed her. She had believed Willow's tears, had bought into the sweet facade, had consoled her through the legal battles and comforted her in court hallways. And now, that trust lay in pieces at her feet. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't even look at herself in the mirror without asking how she'd been so blind. Michael was no better. The knowledge that his silence, his withdrawal, his reluctance to fight harder had contributed to this cascade of horror consumed him. He played the events over in his mind like a broken film reel, each scene darker than the last. He had loved Willow. But the woman he remembered had disappeared, and in her place stood something unrecognizable. Someone who had tried to kidnap his child. Someone who had tried to murder a man he considered family. He struggled not only with heartbreak but with the unbearable guilt of having ever loved her. And then came Jason. He had been in Croatia following a lead. Searching for the truth behind Britt Westbourne's mysterious disappearance. There were whispers in back channels of a woman matching her description spotted in the region. But when he received the coded message from Robert, an urgent distress signal encoded through an old WSB cipher, he didn't hesitate. He boarded the next flight, his mind a storm of questions and fury. Sasha had once been someone he promised to protect. He had kept her safe before, had offered her and Daisy a way out. And now that promise lay in shards, because no place in the world, no matter how remote, had proven strong enough to withstand the madness that followed them. When Jason arrived at the hospital and saw Robert, bandaged, pale, and still visibly shaken, he felt something shift inside him. A quiet rage. Controlled, but all-consuming. He didn't speak of vengeance. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "This won't happen again." And from that moment forward, Jason became something different. Not just a protector, but a shadow hunter, determined to uncover every person who had contributed to the collapse of Sasha's peace. He began pulling threads, through encrypted data, off-the-record medical reports, and whispers from his contacts in security firms, mental health clinics, and international agencies. Jason would find the leak that led Willow to Sasha's location. He would trace every email, every phone call, every shared glance between Drew and Willow during court proceedings. And when he found the truth, he would bring it to light, not with fanfare, but with precision. Because justice wasn't about noise. It was about inevitability. As winter fell over Port Charles, a pall of silence spread across the town. People whispered in corridors, second-guessed friendships, and began locking their doors more than usual. Willow remained at the psychiatric facility, sedated and heavily medicated, but even behind padded walls, her influence lingered like a sickness that refused to die. Her name was no longer spoken with pity. It was spoken with fear. And through it all, General Hospital, once a sanctuary, now resembled a crucible, where loyalty, morality, and sanity itself were being tested and bent under pressure. What had once been a place of healing had become a place of reckoning. A place where every hallway echoed not with hope, but with doubt. And the most terrifying part of all was this: no one believed it was over. Because deep down, they all sensed the same thing, that in the ruins of trust, in the ashes of innocence, something darker was still coming. And next time, it wouldn't come through the front door. It would slip in through the back, wearing the face of someone they loved. Again. In the shattered aftermath of everything that had transpired. The attack, the betrayals, the unraveling of a fragile town held together by secrets, Port Charles stood at a crossroads. The quiet that followed was not peaceful. It was tense, haunted, the kind of silence that settled like fog after a storm, not because the winds had calmed, but because something more dangerous loomed just beyond sight. Everyone felt it. The doctors walking sterile hospital corridors. The parents clutching their children a little tighter. The veterans of the WSB eyeing every shadow as if it might turn on them. For Sasha, motherhood no longer resembled the sacred hope she once imagined, it was now a constant state of vigilance. The days of dreaming about Daisy's first school play, birthday parties, or even just peaceful mornings making pancakes were gone. They were replaced by alarms on every window, routines that changed weekly, and a growing list of names she would never again allow near her daughter. She carried on because she had no choice, because love meant protecting even when it broke you in half. Daisy would grow up not knowing the full truth, not at first. But one day, she would ask why they moved so much. Why she had a different last name. And Sasha would have to look her in the eye and explain that monsters didn't always live under beds. Sometimes, they called themselves family. Michael, now separated from all the people he once loved, stood surrounded by the ruins of his choices. He visited Willow in the psychiatric ward once, only once. She didn't look at him. She didn't speak. She just sat there, humming an unrecognizable lullaby as she rocked back and forth. The woman he loved was gone, her mind trapped in a narrative no one else could see. He left without saying goodbye, and in doing so, closed a chapter he never imagined writing. Drew, still cloaked in ambiguity, returned to his public life. A rising political figure, a community leader, a man who smiled for cameras and signed legislation in the name of progress. But those closest to him saw the cracks behind the performance. They saw the way his hand twitched when Willow's name was mentioned. How quickly he changed the subject when Liesel entered a room. Some believed his silence meant guilt. Others believed it meant fear. But no one, believed it meant innocence. Jason, ever the quiet force, continued his pursuit. He moved through the dark corners of the city and beyond, following whispers, unlocking encrypted files, confronting former allies turned silent accomplices. He had become the reckoning no one saw coming. Not for vengeance, but for balance. He didn't want applause. He didn't need forgiveness. He only needed to know that Sasha and Daisy would never be threatened again. His loyalty didn't waver, not when faced with corruption, not when confronted by lies dressed in legal armor. Because Jason had made a promise, and where others failed, he would not. Liesel, though wounded by the failures of the system she had dedicated her career to, found solace in purpose. She turned her grief into fury and her fury into action. She founded a task force, an unofficial coalition of medical and legal experts dedicated to preventing what happened to Sasha from ever happening again. She vowed to expose every crack in the system that allowed instability to masquerade as motherhood, and every man in power who believed silence was strength.